Good evening and welcome back. I am Minister Lee with Pastor Mike. How are you?
Very good, sir. And yourself?
Good. Very well, thank you.
Good.
Very well. Well, we are in week 2 of our new series, The Joy Set Before Him.
Yes.
Well, we are going to look at Jesus' journey to the cross. And so, if you are following with us, we just want to welcome you back. Last week, we started kind of like right in a weird spot almost, right? Like where it was kind of in the end of one story and then but I guess to recap, Pastor Mike, we started with Jesus is raising Lazarus from the dead, which we can find that story in John, in the book of John. And then following that, we end up seeing that you would think like when somebody comes back from the dead, like this is an opportunity to like celebrate.
Yeah.
Like, listen, everybody, look what happened.
Yeah.
And that's not what we see. And then we kind of leave off on this story with his sister Mary. And so, Pastor Mike, if you wouldn't mind just kind of catching everybody up, and then we'll move forward.
So when we say his sister Mary, we mean Lazarus' sister
This is true.
Mary.
This is true. Yes, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So last week we talked about how Jesus comes to the graveside of Lazarus, and Lazarus, who's now been dead for 4 days. So there's no more hope of him being alive, because in the Midrash, or Talmud, or whichever one it is, it was the idea that the spirit stayed with the body until the 4th day. Right. So it was as Jesus waited until there was no possible way that it could be determined that he just came back to life spontaneously, and he would have now been decomposing. Oof. And Jesus calls him forward, says, Lazarus, come forward. And we recognize that it was a sign. Jesus talks about it as a sign, and the sign being that he is the one who has power over life and death. So we've seen through the Gospels that Jesus has the power over the weather.
That's right.
He has the power over human suffering. He has the power over sickness. He has the power over food and feeding, right? Nature. Yep. And now he comes to this ultimate final sign here and demonstrates that he has the power even over death. And we find this really interesting response, because it's not that people didn't believe he did it. Matter of fact, there were some that believed and they were amazed. But then there were others that believed and ran back to the religious leaders and said, yo, you better watch out, because this guy is really messing with our game here. That's right. And at that point, we find that the Pharisees now say, okay, enough is enough. We got to find a way to take this guy out. Well,
it's interesting, right? Like when we would say take this guy out, I mean, we would say, okay, well, how do we arrest him? How do we discredit him, right? Like it almost reminds me of Daniel. Right? With Daniel, what can we find in the skeletons? And it's he prays all the time. Ugh, all right, fine. We'll use that against him. But it's here. It's not just take him out. It's not let's discredit him. We need to kill him.
Right.
I mean, these are the leaders of the church. This is like our presbytery getting together and going, we need to assassinate so-and-so because they're offering messages. They're incredible. Like, they got to go.
They're doing amazing things for the kingdom of God. Let's get rid of them because they're making us look bad.
Exactly.
Because we're not.
Exactly.
And the people are starting to follow him more than they're following us. And we don't want to lose our temple, and we don't want to lose our positions, and we don't want to lose our power. So it's better if we get rid of this one guy than for us to lose our nation, our religion, and our power. And we talked about how prophetic it actually was. And they didn't Caiaphas didn't realize it at the time how prophetic he was being. And looking back, and I think we'll see some of that again tonight.
Absolutely. I think that's one of those things we're talking about. Just as you're reading through the book of John, there's these I don't know if you want to call it a running commentary or Easter eggs or just these revelations where like John kind of like looks back when he's writing and like, oh, wait a minute, this did mean this. It's almost like he's like he's writing, but he's teaching. And
let's not give ourselves away.
Right. We'll get there. Clearly, you can see we're nerding out a little bit. Sorry, Pastor Marco. But that being said, so then we realize that like the hit is out. Like when you see Jesus, you let us know so we can arrest him, and we're gonna do what we need to do. And so we see that Jesus and his disciples, they kind of retreat, if you will, into the wilderness. Right. It says the wilderness in some, in other scriptures it says to Bethany, which is the home of Lazarus. And then we see this story that almost is just kind of like like, why this little story is such a big deal? And so we see this story about Lazarus' sister, Mary. And she is doing what Mary does every time we see Mary, right? Every time we see Mary, she's at the feet of Jesus. Sometimes it annoys Martha, her sister. And typically Jesus is like, Martha, she's doing the right thing. Just trust me. I know things have to get done, but I'm not going to be here forever, Martha. And so we end up seeing that she takes this expensive perfume. And we talked about the different ways that it was valued, the different uses that it could have had. And I would definitely encourage you to go back because we really did dive into it. But I guess, Pastor Mike, the thing that stuck with me is kind of the last part of that story, which says that wherever the gospel goes, this woman would be remembered.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question for you, as we kind of wrap up this review, is what is it about that story that will stay with you? What is that Mary moment that will stay with you?
You know, there's, with me, I think what we saw there was in that story, we saw value. How much do we value Jesus?
That's good.
Right? So Mary takes this expensive perfume. It would have been a year's wages. And she breaks it and pours it on Jesus. And so she values Jesus. If we look at a monetary value, she values him with a year's worth of things, and she poured. So it's such an extravagant gift. But it's interesting because it's more than that. It says that she let her hair down, which would have been that she didn't even care about her reputation, because a woman would have never exposed her hair, let alone let it down in mixed company. She would have done that only for her husband, meaning it was a moment of utter vulnerability, intimacy. And it says that she wipes his feet. We see in the stories that she wipes Jesus's feet with her hair. So she values him with not only the most expensive gift she can give him, she values him with all of who she is. We find then later that that they're sitting there at the table and they start grumbling like, oh, well, we could have used that that expensive. It could have been sold and the money been given to the poor, right? And so we look at that and somebody go, oh, well, Jesus is only worth 300. Forget the let's be vulnerable. But then we see from there Judas, who's the one who makes the complaint. He gets up and he runs and he goes to the Pharisees. Go, listen, I know where Jesus is going to be. I got his itinerary. And, how much are you going to give me? And they say 30 shekels of silver, which would have been the price of a slave. That's so Judas only values Jesus the price of a slave. And so one of the things that in that story is the question comes down to, for me, is how do I value my relationship with God? How do I look at it? And this is more than just a tithes and offering message, because on the surface of it, if it was just like, let me just bring my biggest offering, okay, then I got to give more.
Right.
But it was much more than that, because Mary values him with all of her being. She lays herself bare at his feet. And so that's the story. That's a standout piece from the story for me. God, how often do I put a value on my relationship that's monetary or time and not heart?
Well, what's interesting is now as we get into, today's scripture, one thing we see is we begin to see this pattern where, back in Matthew chapter 16, they have this moment where Jesus is with his disciples and he says, who do you say that I am, right? What have you heard about me? Right? And well, somebody thinks you're a reincarnation of Elijah, and somebody thinks that you're, just a good teacher, and somebody thinks, and Peter, who's one of my favorites, Peter, but we'll leave that
Stubborn,
there. Right.
Obstinate. Okay, I got it.
Passionate. Yes. He runs into the fire only to realize that, there's nothing in the barn except for you. So now we have to go get you, Peter. What are you doing, man? Slow down. Right? But Peter looks at Jesus and he has this moment of clarity and he says, well, you're the Messiah. You are the Savior. You're the one that's been prophesied. You are God incarnate. That's who you are. And Jesus looks at him and goes, wow, there's no way you could have known that outside of the Spirit. So it tells me that in that moment, the Spirit didn't come down and do some weird thing in Peter, like he was just talking. Right. But what it does is immediately Jesus says, there's no other way you could have known that. Now you got to keep it to yourself, right? This isn't the time yet. But what we begin to see with this story with Mary is he is allowing Mary to worship his Messiah. The Messiah that he's been keeping under wraps. We see that from healing to healing, you've been healed, go in peace. Yeah. However, don't say anything. Don't say anything. And now we begin to see that Jesus is now responding to the names that he's being called as Messiah. And I think that brings us kind of to the beginning. And so while I want to spend most of our time looking at what we traditionally call the triumphal entry, I do want to just so we're going to start in the book of Matthew, chapter 21, verse 1. Before we get there, though, this is one of those few stories that's in all four of the Gospels. I believe it's Mark 11, Matthew 21, right? John 12, and Luke 19.
So it's Mark 12.
Oh, it's Mark 12.
Yep.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry. You know what? You got the old man. Mark 11.
There you go. Look at that. No notes.
Look at that. You got the old man.
There we go. So we have Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, and John 12.
Correct.
And so what we see though is what's very interesting is in Mark and in Matthew we see the story before the story.
Right.
And so if you can kind of give us the version of blind Bartimaeus, if you can give us kind of the short version. Because I do think it speaks to this idea where Jesus is allowing others now, or maybe by the power of the Spirit, that's what he said, right? Yeah. It's through the Spirit that you can see that Jesus is now identifying with this new piece of him, and it's really a game changer.
So, in Mark chapter 10, we find the story of blind Bartimaeus. And in short, he's as Jesus is now working his way towards Jerusalem, he's kind of on his way. They're outside of Jericho, and as they're there, the crowds are tight around them, and there's this gentleman, Bartimaeus, sitting on the side of the road. He hears that Jesus is coming, in short, and he just starts shouting, Jesus, Messiah, have mercy on me. Son of David, have mercy on me. And everybody's trying to shut him up. Like, hey, leave him alone. The master's busy. Like, you're just a blind guy. Stay over there, right? But it says that Jesus hears him. Calling to him, and he calls him out, and he says, Jesus stopped and said, Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up, on your feet, he's calling to you. And this is a very important verse, right? It says, throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet, and he came to Jesus. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. The blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. Go, your faith has healed you. Immediately received his sight and followed Jesus. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Now listen, there's so many things in here. But it's interesting because he calls him Son of David, have mercy on me. When he then gets in front of Jesus, he calls him Rabbi, I want to see. Right? So there's almost this sense of a little bit of a, hey, I'm going to get your attention with this big title, but now that I'm in front of you, Rabbi, good teacher, good master, I'm going to do this. So there's a couple things. So there's this allusion to your identity, but I'm not ready fully to commit. But the thing that's important is that little detail, throwing his cloak aside. And I've always loved that because in their culture, your clothes really kind of represented who you were. So it wasn't like you went out to a market and like, let me buy a beggar's cloak.
Gotcha.
It's just that the cloak his clothes would have been poor. They would have been ratty. They would have showed him ill-fitting. Blind guy can't tell whether it's clean or whether it's dirty, right? And so for him, but they were identified by their clothes and they knew it. So when Jesus says your faith has set you free, what was it? There was something about blind Bartimaeus when he took his cloak and he threw it off because he knew he wasn't going to ever be identified by that again. So it's this beautiful thing of sometimes, for us to actually step into the new identities, we got to let go of some of the old, the old stuff. So for him, the faith was, I'm calling out, I'm recognizing, hey, the Son of David, I'm getting your attention. I'm calling out to you, Master, mercy. And now I'm believing that when I'm coming to you, I'm not leaving the same way I came to you.
What I love is I'm not leaving.
And I'm not even leaving. I'm following you.
I mean, you've been blind for how long? You've never, I don't know. Do you have a family that you literally haven't seen? Do you have, and instead of going back to relive everything he's missed, that he's heard, every sound, every smell, to go make up for lost time, he leaves it back there as he continues to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And this is now where we pick up our story in Matthew chapter 21, verse 1. And if Pastor Mike, if you wouldn't mind reading.
Absolutely. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and once you will find a donkey there, tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heavens!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" And the crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee."
So, if we're looking at this picture, we're realizing that just before this, in Bethany, Lazarus is raised from the dead.
Right.
Then we're realizing that in the same area, as Jesus is leaving Bethany, we see his interaction with Bartimaeus.
Right.
So we're seeing that Jesus can bring somebody back to life, and in this instance, heal somebody, a blind person, with just a word.
Right.
Now we go back and we can look at all the different ways he healed blindness, but that's not the point right now, with just a word. So when we begin to look at this, I think the thing that immediately jumps out to me is that Jesus is sending out these 2 disciples and giving them the task of going to commandeer a donkey. And so I guess, Pastor Mike, the nerd in me wants to know, I look at this and I go, typically I feel like Jesus really believes in the buddy system.
Right.
Like nobody is ever out by themselves. He sends the 72 2 by 2. He said we'll find out later in this series that somebody goes to prepare the upper room. It's never just, all right, Judas, you go. You have the money, so you go. Or, Matthew, you have some connections. Is there something to look at with the fact that there's these groups of 2s?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think that, first of all, it sets up a pattern. There's a pattern of agreement, right? There's 2 people going out. I was going to say, you already tipped the hand on it with, he sends out the 72, 2 by 2 to go out. And so, I guess one of the things that's important is that, sometimes in leadership, we think we're always alone. Or we're always launching out to do good things for God, and there's got to be the guy who's leading. And I think that it's important. I mean, we have a senior pastor along those lines, but so often, we feel like we're alone in the things of God. Like I've just got to, it's me and Jesus. We got to go it alone. When the reality of it is, even Jesus set the pattern that there would be support, that we support one another. I mean, and it's followed through the rest of the New Testament. When was there ever a journey that Paul went on that he didn't take somebody with him?
Paul and Silas, Paul and Barnabas, Paul and Timothy. Wow.
And by the way, Luke was always around there too.
Somebody had to write it down.
Somebody had to write it down, right?
Good point.
So there was always this thing, and I think if nothing else, and I'm sure we could probably dig this out and make more point of it, but I think on the just simplest part is, in life, if we think that we're going to do great things for God and with God all by ourselves, we're probably deceived. Because there's something about having a partner in ministry that both holds us accountable, that encourages us, and I love the scripture over in Ecclesiastes where it says, essentially,
3-stranded cord, right?
one by himself is whatever, but if one is cold, the other one, they lie together, they stay warm. We use it as a marriage scripture, but the three-stranded cord can't be broken. Why? Because the idea is that there's two of us, but then when God is in the middle of it, that cord isn't easily broken. I think there's a lot of people, they want to launch out and do great things for God, and so they leave any sense of covering, any sense of accountability, any sense of partnership behind, and it's just me and Jesus. And Jesus was like, no, I put you with others, and then I come into the midst of it, and now it's not broken.
Wow.
But it's interesting because here these two disciples go now. It's like they're out now, launched out. Jesus says, hey, go and do this. So stepping back, he takes the 72 and says, go out. Spread the good news in my name, lay hands on the sick, cast out demons, and they go out. Like up till now, this has only been Jesus doing this.
Right.
So they had to accept that and, okay, if Jesus is sending us, then it's going to happen. Here's another thing. Okay, go out and you're going to find a donkey and her colt there and go and take it. And if anybody says, say the master needs it. So once again, he's sending two out, but they also have to be trusting absolutely in the message of Jesus. Jesus goes, it seems a little less like, okay, what would I rather do? Would I rather have more faith to be sent out to do miracles, or would I rather take the charge to go and steal somebody's donkey?
Well, but that's such a good point, though. How often is it that we feel that if it's not miraculous, then are we actually being led? We think if it's mundane, it can't be God.
Right.
Right? And yet, he's a God of consistency.
Right.
Right? A God who doesn't change, you would think would get bored.
Right.
Right? Like if I'm always ever perfect, I got nothing to learn.
Right.
And yet, here he is, and here we are. And so one of the things, and I like the point that you said, I was reading and studying and thinking about this, but I love the idea that there are no qualifications, right? It's just the Lord needs it.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I really liked about that idea was, Jesus, I don't know, and maybe it's just me, but there are things where I guess I get that he is God. But there are sometimes I don't know what it is. I just think that sometimes there's like an all shucks about him. Like, oh shucks, yeah, okay, I'll okay, I'll love you guys. I'm just a little lamb and I'll love you. And the idea that this is like planned out, that he goes, I'm doing this in Bethany, where right now they're calling me Lord. I'm being anointed as a Messiah. Yep. I'm being referred to as a Messiah. So when I tell you to tell them that the Lord needs it, there's not going to be, well, Lord, who? Yeah. Is this for Bartholomew? No. This is for Jesus, and that's it.
Let me jump in on one thing here, right? If you absolutely believe you are doing what God has called you to do, then there's such a matter-of-fact authority with your responses that people are like, oh, right? So when we find in the scriptures, in Acts, it says they heard Peter talking, and they were amazed because they knew they were unschooled fishermen, and yet they spoke with such authority.
That's right.
Why did they speak with such authority? Because they knew the words they had came from Jesus himself.
That's good.
They knew the message they had was true. So, can you imagine? I don't imagine that when the disciples were questioned about the donkey, they were like, our master needs it? They were like, we're taking the donkeys because the master needs it.
As they're untying it and just looking up.
What do you do with that? At that point, oh, okay, right? There's something convincing about the tone of somebody who knows they're doing what God's called them to do. And I think it's one of those moments in all of the disciples with all of their foibles and insecurities, when they knew they were supposed to do something for Jesus, they just did it. It was the same thing with the upper room. Go ahead, find the guy there, go ahead and tell him, I'm coming ahead, make preparations, we're going to have dinner together for the Last Supper. Okay.
Well, it's interesting because now what we see, you said, I love what you said. You said, well, what are you going to do with that? Right? So if I'm the owner of the donkey, what are you going to do with that? And the Bible tells us what they do.
Yeah.
They follow.
Yeah.
They don't stay back because all of a sudden, before we know it, we go, the Lord needs them. This took place to fulfill the prophecy, and we'll get to that in a minute. But 7 it says, well, and again I'm reading from the ESV. It says they brought the donkey and the colt and put them on their cloaks, and most of the crowd. Well, where's this crowd coming from?
Yeah.
All of a sudden they hear that Jesus needs a donkey. Well, I want to know what he's going to do with it. So let me see what's going on. Now, at the time, did they know it was a fulfillment of prophecy? I don't know. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But very interesting that was Jesus aware? Was Jesus aware of these dots? Absolutely. Right? So, Pastor Mike, I guess for a moment, if I'm going to make this, let me make this relevant to today. If we're saying, Jesus, you are supposed to be, we'll make it about Connecticut, because I think if we make it nationally, we might get in trouble. Jesus, you're supposed to be the governor, okay? And so Jesus goes, oh, governor, I need you to, Jesus, you're going to go, you're going to make Connecticut right, you're going to do what you need to do. Jesus, that's what we want. Okay, great. And so Jesus looks around, I need some transportation. I got just what you need. I know a guy, I'm going to call Joe. Joe has limos, I'm going to call Joe. And Jesus says, I think I need a Prius. I guess my question to you is, why not this magnificent horse? And why not just a donkey, but a baby donkey?
Yeah. So, the interesting thing, so I think this has been a story that for those who have been in the church, right? If you grew up in the church, you kind of may know this answer, but maybe some of you are newer, so you understand it. And it does seem like, does it matter whether,
that's a good point.
whatever.
Right.
And with Jesus, everything matters, right? And like every detail, everything he did had a purpose. And we'll come to a little bit later, like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't see it then.
Right.
But, and so what they understood, it was that a king, right? Nobody ever got a kingship in a peaceful manner, right? The closest you could have to a kingship in a peaceful manner would have been an inherited kingdom. So the king dies and his son takes over without maybe without a fight or whatever. But somehow those kingdoms always came as a conquering. So you see, when the Romans come in, they come in on horses. But when you look through Scripture and you find examples of godly kings, they often came in on a donkey, right? Because they were a king who came in peace. So, for example, we find in 1 Kings, we find the example of David's second son. So his first son, Absalom, is killed.
That's right.
David's now on his deathbed, so his second son, who would have been the next in line to the throne, just assumes, well, I'm going to be king. So what does he do? He gets 50 of his best guys with all their horses and chariots. They mount their chariots and they go through the town. They find a priest, and we're going to do the requisite sacrifices.
An inauguration, basically,
and then declares himself king. Right? David finds out. Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet go, "Hey, David, just want to let you know this is what's going on. I don't think this is what God wanted." And David's response is, "That is correct. Get Solomon and put him on my mule." And so it's just Solomon who is now led on a mule and they declare Solomon as king. And here's the interesting thing. The city turns and rejoices to the point where Adoniah realizes that, oh my gosh, I'm not the rightful king. And he kind of repents from it.
Absolutely.
What's the difference? The king of Israel, who was God called, comes in on a donkey. The king who tried to impose himself comes in on a horse. And we can find examples of this. And so here we are, Jesus comes in. He's not coming in like a Roman conquering king on a steed, right? Followed by chariots, with bodyguards and soldiers and armor bearers. He comes in as a man sitting on a donkey, the symbol of peace, sitting on other people's cloaks, followed by common people who are praising him, and yet, interestingly, the city is set astir. So, symbolism there, Jesus is a king who comes in peace, which is an important detail in a bit.
Absolutely. Now, what's interesting is that, One of the things, and again, I think so much of this is cultural, right? So I don't know that everything has a relevant, apples to apples,
Right.
But the idea would be here that, okay, so what is this idea? I mean, we call this Palm Sunday.
Right.
So what is this idea of palm branches and cloaks?
Yeah.
Now, let me just ask, cloaks first. Does this have anything to do with the point you made about blind Bartimaeus?
So again, Scripture is very symbolic, right? Now, this wasn't the first time that somebody was ushered into Jerusalem on a donkey with palm fronds and cloaks.
Okay.
Right? So in the Maccabean revolt, was it Judas Maccabeus? Simon Maccabeus. Is ushered into Jerusalem when they overthrow the Roman rule, right? And so he's brought in as this king, and he comes in, and they really pretty much do the same thing.
That's right.
They wave palm fronds and whatever. So we've made the palm frond a religious symbol for us, but back then it was actually a symbol that it became a symbol of nationalism. Nationalistic pride, and so to the point where it was on the coins that they produced.
How about that?
And so when they were waving these banners, they were saying, "Hey, you're the conquering king. We get it. You're the guy. You're the guy who's gonna take care of us. And so, welcome, Son of David." Why? Because in Isaiah chapter 9, it said that there would be one who would come, and he would come back and restore, right, the throne of David. He would be in the line of David, and he would restore to them the throne. Well, and he would break the yoke of the oppressor.
That's right.
So guess what? They're seeing themselves. They're under the oppression of Rome. They're seeing this guy who is absolutely, he can bring people back from the dead, like qualified.
We're going back to Jesus,
and
not Simon.
Jesus doing this, right? And so they welcome him the same way they welcome Simon of Maccabees. They welcome him as a conquering king, in a sense, with palm fronds. And hey, Jesus is going to make Jerusalem great again.
So my question then, Pastor Mike, is this: if that is the case, and I mean, I'm going to ask you, there's no way to really get into the minds of the people. Yeah. But as we read this, what I hear you saying is they're celebrating what Jesus can be when he becomes a king, when he becomes established on a throne, and he's the king. And yet, what we've talked about is this idea that this is not Jesus's point at all.
Right. So what that's actually a really good way of looking at it. They're celebrating him coming in and the possibility that they could coronate him as king when he overthrows these Romans, not realizing he's already the king coming in. They're looking for him to come in and rule when he's already the ruler outside the walls.
This is so much, and I know we didn't talk about this before, but this so much lines up with that whole Caiaphas line.
Yes.
Like they are speaking prophetically and have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
My goodness. So we see, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is the Lord who comes. Blessed is who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Now, Pastor Mike, I'd like to just pause right here.
Yeah.
And we talked about the fact that this is actually in all four Gospels.
Yes.
And so before we continue to go to verses 10 and 11, I think we talked about taking a quick detour to the book of Luke.
So in Luke 9 shares the details. So if we step back, for those of you watching, maybe you haven't been watching long, or maybe you missed some episodes, but we've talked about there's the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We say there's the three Synoptic Gospels, which means these are the three essentially same Gospels. Mm-hmm. They're very much aligned. They have a lot of detail that's the same, or they very similar. John's seems to be very often has different details that are not in the other Gospels. However, this is one of the stories that shows up across all four of them. So the object lesson, because you'll see some details that are different, the object lesson that I like to say is there's a four-way intersection, right? There's an accident in the middle. There's one person on each corner. All four of them saw the accident, but all four have they saw different details of the accident, right? In some ways, that's a simplistic view of explaining this, but Luke has some detail in here, which is really fascinating. And so when we get to this, we find in verse 39, well, I'm going to back up in verse 38, because here they are. They're now marching on Jerusalem. The people are shouting loud, welcome, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. And it says in verse 39, some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and he wept over it. And he said, even you had known on this day what would bring you peace, but now is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Fascinating. There's a lot in here, but it's interesting because once again we see this allusion to blindness. Through John, we find that those who were born blind receive sight, while the Pharisees who were born with sight gradually grow more and more blind. It's kind of like we talk about, you talk about some people who get so angry about something and they can't let it go. And the more they deal with it, the more angry they get. The more angry they get, the more blind. We call it a blind rage.
That's right.
And throughout the ministry of Jesus, the Pharisees are losing more and more and more of their control over the people, because more and more people are going over to this Jesus guy. More and more people are going over to this great rabbi. And they're even starting to think that he might be the Messiah. And so they're enraged at this. They're enraged that he would allude that he might be the Son of God. By the way, it's interesting, when I talk about the Messiah, people think he might be the Messiah. They don't even have a concept of what they're asking for or looking for as a Messiah.
You're absolutely right.
So they're looking for that one who would save them, but they're thinking save them from the bondage of the Romans.
See, what's interesting is that, remember, the reason that the Pharisees ultimately want to kill Jesus is because they want to live unnoticed by the Romans, right? They don't want the Romans to become Jewish.
Yeah.
They really just want the Romans to leave.
Yeah.
But until they have the power to kick them out, they want to it's almost like this guerrilla tactic.
Right.
Like, when we're strong enough, then we'll revolt. But until then, because if not, you're gonna make it worse for us.
We're gonna lose the temple. We're gonna lose our power.
They're gonna take all of the things that matter to us and so imagine that your fear is that if we do this, and if we do this at this time, right? We talked about this Passover season. If we do it then, there would be a mob that would rise up, and yet coming from the sticks, basically, right, from Bethany, from the wilderness, there's this crowd of people. Where Jesus is in the middle of the crowd. They're chanting, "Blessed is the King." Not talking about a king in a castle, not talking about the Romans, not Caesar, not anybody. Blessed is this King. And in a moment where, Pastor Mike, I'm going to be honest with you. If I am ever in a place where there's a crowd of people that are telling me that I am amazing, right? This is the guy. You want this guy. This is the guy you want when I play football for you to go. Give him the ball and let him loose. Nothing in that moment would make me take the attention off of myself. My head would get so big and I would say, just come on, just keep heaping it on. And yet Jesus stops in the middle of all this, looks over the city and has this moment. And the Bible is not one to mince words.
Yeah.
He wept.
Yeah.
What is the importance of that?
So here's the interesting thing, right? So we find two moments in Jesus' ministry where he weeps. So we find in John 11:35, right? He comes to the temple, or he comes to the tomb where Lazarus is. He hears he sees the people weeping. And it says he wept. But when you're looking at the Greek there, it implies that he was, it was a quiet weeping. tears left his eyes, right? And it says people looked at him, oh, how he loved Lazarus, right? But the word here for he wept over it was very different. It's a lament. Okay, so Lamentations, the book of Lamentations, they would, it's a loud wail or a cry. So this is kind of like bizarre, right? So here you have Jesus. He's got this throng of people following him, right? And he's coming up, and they're cheering, "Hey, you're going to be you're the king,
the greatest,
you're the guy,
gift from God." Just right.
And Jesus weeps. There's a loud wail, and it's weird. I've tried to think about this and imagine what must I have thought about as a disciple if all of a sudden, Jesus, this is your moment of glory. Like, you're coming in, the people are getting behind you. Like this is the deal. Your moment has arrived.
I mean, we're hitting each other, and we're going, listen. If he's the king, imagine what our positions are.
Yeah, let me step back for just a minute. Here's another detail, right? Here's a little detail, and we could tease it out. It's there, and you have to go find it. The people are not the ones who start crying out, blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord. It was the disciples who did it. So the disciples are the ones who start crying out, and guess what happens? Everybody starts picking up the cry. So everybody around is now going, the disciples are like, hey, this is the guy. And everybody's like, yeah, that's the guy. Okay, yeah. And so it's kind of like you get this crowd feeling.
That's
it's like,
right.
If you ever go to like a concert or something like that, or political rallies, you get one person go, USA.
That's right.
USA. And next thing you know, everybody's going, yeah, USA. And then it gets louder, and the louder it gets, the more excited everybody gets. Right. And at the same time, it's all said and done, we're like, why were we even saying that? Like, what's the deal here? And the difference was the disciples get it going, and the crowd begins to follow. And what do the Pharisees say? The Pharisees don't try to shut the people up. The Pharisees say, shut your disciples up. Why? Because the disciples were the one getting everybody going, and the Pharisees didn't, quiet everybody down. We don't want to lose our spot. And by the way, who are you to be leading the people, right? So that's just kind of an important detail that I don't want to lose on that. But anyway, now, so that all of that's going on. The disciples are hyping Jesus. They're his hype crew, right? And then next thing you know, Jesus is wailing over the city. And I can't imagine what it would have been like. I'd have been like, yo, Jesus, can you like kind of pipe down a little bit? Like, I know you're like upset something's going on here, but can you kind of save it till we get it together? Get it together, man. We got people following us,
Kings don't cry.
There you go. And it's interesting, if I just divert for just a moment on this and put a practical point, it's interesting how often we are uncomfortable with other people's tears.
Well,
we're uncomfortable with people's laments, when the reality of it is, so they must have been uncomfortable. But if they understood the purpose of why he was lamenting, they may have had a change of heart themselves. If they knew why he was weeping, then they may have understood. If they knew, because Jesus knew what's going to happen. And 44 years after this moment is when the Romans come in. Titus, the son of Caesar Vespasian, sends his son Titus and says, yo, the Jews are uprising. Go handle it. So 70 A.D., he comes in. He finally breaks down the walls. He gets into Jerusalem, and he slaughters 600,000 of the Jews. And he tears, and he leaves not one stone left from the temple. And so here Jesus is, and he's already told them, tear this temple down, and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. They're not getting it. Jesus is looking, and he's saying, he's lamenting because he knows the judgment that's coming. And ironically, he knows the judgment is coming because they've rejected the right king. I put this interesting note down for myself just to remember. But do you know what the word Jerusalem means?
I believe it's City of Peace, isn't it?
It's City of Peace. So isn't it interesting that the City of Peace was blind to the King of Peace that was coming in? They're saying, glory to God, Prince of Peace, glory in the highest, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. and they identify him as Prince of Peace, and yet they're actually blind to what it even means, because they're thinking he's going to come in and overthrow the Roman rule and bring peace, when he's coming in to overthrow the rule of sin in the hearts of men.
And that, I think, as we're looking at this, I think these are the things, right? These are the things that stick out. This idea that they knew what to do.
Yeah.
They knew that this is what we do. We get the palms because palms are peace, right? And we get, if I'm not mistaken, what's also interesting is I believe it was in that time, Caesar's motto was victory, or peace through victory.
Yeah.
And wait a minute, what? And it was like, yes, if you agree with us and you let us just take over, there'll be peace.
Yeah.
And if not, we'll wipe you out and there'll be peace.
Right.
So however you want. And so I think, and again, I've referred to this a few times, but before we go on, Pastor Mike, if you can bring us back to the biblical understanding of peace. Mm-hmm. Because I think what we have here is we have a crowd that is looking at things me-centered. Right. We have a crowd that's looking at things from a practical piece. And then we have Jesus who's looking at this bigger picture.
So the crowd is looking for the absence of conflict. That's right. From those who would rule over him. They're looking for political freedoms. They're looking for cultural freedoms. And if we can just be in a place, if we can rule ourselves, and our culture is at the forefront, right? Then we will be happy and we will be at peace. We just need freedom, and so he's going to come and give us freedom, and human nature is obsessed with this idea of freedom. But the reality of it is the gospel never promised freedom in the ways that we want it. One time I said that freedoms are precious, but they're never promised. Suffering was always promised, but it led to the gospel being relevant to a world obsessed with freedom, right? Why? Because while we're looking and longing for a culture that supports our theological views and makes us comfortable so that we don't have to worry, Jesus was looking for something else. Because how many people in America, in the freest country of all, still we see so much division, so much anger. We can have all of the best stuff and it's never enough. Why? Because the freedom and the peace that Jesus was bringing is shalom. It was wholeness of heart. We can have all of the blessings, but if we're broken on the inside, then we're a slave to our sin. We're a slave to the culture. We're a slave to debt. We're a slave to everything else. And Jesus came so that when we were able to say, recognize that we were free from our sin, we could live at peace. I'm at peace with myself. There's some people, and you look at them, and they go through tremendous suffering with so much grace. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they understand peace. They understand wholeness of heart and wholeness of being. And Jesus came not to overthrow political systems. He came to overthrow the sin which causes our hearts to live in turmoil. He came, and when sin is fixed, when sin is forgiven, sin breaks relationship. God came so that Jesus died so that sin could be broken, so that I could have peace between him and me, between you and me. And as I now live in unity with you, and we understand the message of the kingdom, which is to love and serve others, it doesn't matter how much the culture wants to persecute us. Matter of fact, it's interesting, Nero was so determined to kill the Christians. Why? Because the more they suffered, the more they served others. And so the more they served others, people are going, nobody does this. What is their message? Yes. And so more and more people were getting saved and becoming Christians because their message of peace was so countercultural.
Well, it's very interesting, right? Because when we look at this culture, when we look at the day, what we're seeing a group of people who are saying, we want the Romans to leave so that we can live under God's rule.
Right.
God is here in the form of Jesus. But I don't want that. Right. And again, I don't want to get political, but again, how many times do we put caveats? How many times do we continue to move we put our own obstructions, right? As opposed to what would it look like for me to live free?
Yeah.
What would it look like for you to live free? And so, Pastor Mike, I think then the final point I want to look at is, we'll go back and so after Jesus has this moment where, Luke just ends it there. So we don't even know what happens. But if we look at it in the context of Matthew, Matthew then says, and when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd said, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee." And while I think we can spend some time there, I think what I want to do, though, is I want to move to the next point. And the next point for me, Pastor Mike, is this. What we know about biblical history is that for 3 years, the disciples have been with Jesus.
Yeah.
And the Bible doesn't give us, we hear all kinds of rabbinic traditions, right? One of the traditions is that you would want to walk so close to your rabbi that his dust would be, you want to be caked with the front of you, with the back of him, right? You are that close. The Bible doesn't say that they go on vacations, right? The Bible doesn't say Jesus leaves for 4 weeks and then he comes back. They are always together. Every sermon, every meal, this is what they do. So it's obvious to me then that what is happening, the disciples are prepared for. Right? Because obviously, Jesus has been saying, I got to do these things. Okay, let's make it happen. And so, while maybe a little bit different, I wouldn't have picked a donkey, still would have went with the majestic steed, but okay, fine. You pointed out a passage, and it was John 12. And there was a passage in there that I would love for you to read and kind of just break down for us to really just help us to understand, because maybe even as we're reading this, we're not understanding all of the symbolism.
Yeah. So it's found in John 12:16. It says, and this is now, he's gone through this whole story, and it says, "At first his disciples did not understand all of this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him." And so the interesting thing is that I love John. John has this way of, Luke has this way of, he writes everything, right? He writes everything in a court order. You use the term.
Like a deposition?
Like a deposition.
Or like a stenographer.
Right. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, right? We said last week that Mark is like a text message.
Right, it's one giant text message. There's no details. Suddenly, all of a sudden, whoa. Calm down, Mark. Goodness gracious.
Matthew wrote things from a Jewish perspective, right? In whatever. But John writes this, and John's gospel was the youngest of them all. The others were all written before John. So John is now writing from this, I don't know if luxury is the word I want to say, but he's now towards the end of his life, and when this letter is being dictated, this book is being dictated, and he has the ability to kind of look back over things and realize how many of these moments that they walked through were prophetic moments. We didn't see it then, but now we get it. We realize what was happening. We didn't realize at the time. We were getting the crowd stirred up saying, "Hey, Hosanna, here's the Son of David," right? But we didn't even really fully understand what was happening. We went in and we didn't know. And it wasn't until after Jesus, is lifted up, after the ascension, which means that now it's after this commissioning that they begin to have this full understanding of, oh my gosh. And I like to think of it as the disciples on the road to Emmaus, right?
That's right.
Here Jesus dies, he raises again, and there's these two disciples that are walking down a path, and a third guy walks alongside him and says, "Hey, what are you talking about?" And they're like, "Oh, you haven't heard what just happened?" They're like, "No, tell me." And they're arguing, and they're trying to figure it out, and this man begins to make sense of everything from Scripture. And so they invite him to come in and have a meal, and they break the bread, and it says, all of a sudden, it was revealed. They realized they were eating with Jesus, and in that moment, Jesus disappears. And it says, "Did not our hearts burn within us?" Right? Why? Because all of a sudden, it made sense. They had the revelation. Oh my gosh. And I think sometimes we spend so much time trying to understand everything in the moment. Like, well, wait a minute. God, what are you doing right now? Like, what's the purpose? Or it's, I'm not going to walk forward until I understand, right? Well, Jesus, tell me where to go and I'll go. Make sense of the future for me so I know that I can follow you into it. When the reality of how much of prophecy in Scripture was not recognized as prophecy until after it happened. And it was in the looking back. This is one of the reasons we talked about journaling, why journaling is so important.
That's right.
So many things in your life you could see as being prophetic if you had the way to go back and look at them and go, oh, that's why that happened. And so the disciples had this moment. They're able to look back after Jesus is glorified. He goes back in. They're able to look at it and go, they have their aha moments looking back. And it's in that moment they realize Jesus didn't come to take over, because there was still, I'm sure there was still some sense of, but Jesus, wait a minute. Matter of fact, at one point the disciples go, Jesus, aren't you going to get rid of these guys? And Jesus goes, guys, I could call down a legion of angels and wipe them all out like that, but that's not what I'm here for. Afterwards, so even in that moment, they're still kind of going, Jesus, you are going to kind of get rid of the Romans, right? But they have this aha moment. He indeed is the King of peace. He is the one who came to conquer the kingdoms of this earth, but not in a political way. He came to bring peace. And when I look at this, I think about it, is how often am I still ruled by the anxieties of the world around me? How often is it that I'm trying to make my life based on, God, if you would just come and fix this problem for me, then everything's going to be good. And sometimes he's saying, it's those very problems that you're dealing with are the ones that I can prove myself king in your life over if you'll trust me, if you will let me give you peace through the circumstances.
What I love that you said is that he is the King of peace. He's not the king that brings peace, right? So often we're looking for that. When my big brother gets here, okay, he's gonna no. It's when I believe in, we talked about this last week, when we believe into Jesus, when we share in it, then his peace becomes my peace.
Right.
Recognizing that if I don't know the future, it doesn't make a difference. I would love to know it, right? I wish everything was that easy. Hey, while you're taking the donkey, somebody's going to tell you, just say Jesus needs it. I wish it was that easy. But it's not all the time. And I think that this is, what I love is the vulnerability of John to look back. And I think there's something that does come with the humility of walking with Christ. The humility to sit there and go, I was one of the 12. And on top of that, I was one of the 3 on the inside. And I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
It took me until now.
Yeah.
So, Pastor Mike, I think my question to you would be, as we wrap up this section, one thing that I would say is, Pastor Mike, what would be the nugget? What would be the practical piece that you would walk away from or want to encourage our church family with as we go from a story that, in all honesty, for many of us has just become kind of a story. It's Palm Sunday, we celebrate, we get our palms, and we move. What is it that you see or that you would want us to focus on and to really think throughout this whole what's left of this season of Lent?
We have a culture very often in the American church of, I know God's favor by the way that I'm blessed. And so if there's pain ahead of me, that's clearly not the path that God has called me to. Wow. Because he wants me to be blessed. But our theme for this series is Jesus, for the joy set before him. So, but it's interesting, this dichotomy, right? Here we're talking about Luke. The joy set before him tangibly in this story is Jerusalem. He set his eyes towards Jerusalem. He's not swayed by the calls of the crowd. Matter of fact, when the Pharisees go, hey, listen, tell your disciples to shut up, he goes, listen, if they shut up, even the rocks are going to cry.
That's not your
Creation
problem.
will cry.
Noise isn't the problem.
Noise ain't the issue. But yet, even along the way, Jesus weeps. wails, "Oh my gosh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if only you knew what was coming." Why? Because you've turned your heart away from a visitation. Jesus walks through and into suffering because he knows the purpose and the joy is on the other side of it. And I think sometimes it's important for us to know that if we trust Jesus, our suffering is not in vain. And our blessing, our joys are not always a sign of blessing as much as sometimes they're a distraction from what God calls us to do. Sometimes the enemy will put wealth in your way to keep you distracted from the call that God has put on your life. Sometimes we're looking for the good things to be good so that we can feel like God is blessing us, when the reality is God's called us to a difficult walk of sacrifice because he knows at the end of the road there's a victory that we can't know. And the only way we're going to find is to get to the end and look back and go, I could not have known this then, but I see it now. So I would say, don't be distracted all the time pursuing blessings, and don't think at the same time for others that your suffering is in vain. When the King of Peace is in charge of your heart, I promise you there will be a day like the disciples that you will look back and go, oh my gosh, now I get it. And that's why Paul would say in Romans 8:28, my God will make all things work together for the good of those who are called, who love him and are called according to his purposes. Love Jesus. Believe he's called you according to his purposes. Have confidence to know that even if you don't know the purposes of a suffering now, there will be a purpose. And don't be distracted by blessings. But also remember, too, God does bless us. So don't think that the road with Jesus is always just marked with suffering. But don't be afraid of suffering at the same time. And by the way, the other side of it is this. He sent them out 2 by 2. Because when one is weak, the other is able to hold him up. And so maybe for some of you, that's the other piece. Maybe you're going through suffering and you feel all alone, because you are. You've been called to be a part of the body of Christ. Join with others that can come alongside and encourage you, and be the love, the hands and feet and the mouthpiece of Jesus for you in your suffering. And if you're not suffering, open your eyes to the suffering of those around you and speak encouragement. You may have to open your wallet and pay and cover somebody else who's in need. Jesus said to disciples when they poured out, when Mary poured out the perfume all over Jesus, and they were incensed by this, and they're like, that money could have been given to the poor. And Jesus says, the poor will always be with you. He didn't say that, the poor always go with you, so don't do anything. He was making an allusion, saying the poor will always be with you, so walk with an open hand as Mary has done. So that's maybe for some of us. Some of you, to understand the rule of Jesus in your heart is to be like the rich young ruler when Jesus said, if you want to follow me, you're going to have to let go of your possessions, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. Why? Because it's in that way you understand he's the King of peace in your own heart. And I promise you, when you have peace in your heart, it cannot be stolen away.
What this leaves me with is, I think we said it last week, and we talked about the fact that when Jesus shows up, there's division. And I think we hear them, we go, well, wait a minute, Jesus is a unifier. That can't be. But it's true. When Jesus shows up, we have a choice to make. This entire teaching is about, is he my king?
Yeah.
They didn't say, here comes my friend. They didn't say, here comes a great teacher. They said, here comes the king who will save us. I'm begging you, save us. And so, we talked about in the beginning that we saw this change in Jesus, where he allows Mary to worship him as a Messiah. He allows Bartimaeus to call him out in public as a Messiah. He takes a colt, a donkey colt, and he rides that in as a king in times of peace. And he's beginning to elevate himself. He's beginning to affirm the elevations of others. And it's because right now, Jesus is saying it is time for you to choose what side are you on. And what we end up finding is this. For many scholars will have you believe, many commentators will have you believe that Jesus waits until this time because he knew the claims that he was making were death, brought death. This was blasphemy. This was treason. I mean, this was honestly, this was suicidal, what he was doing. That this could bring the end of his life. And so when Peter has this revelation, it's not my time. So just keep quiet. But we end up seeing now that Jesus now is ready. And the only way for Jesus to die is for some to choose for him to not be their king. And so here's my challenge to you. My challenge to you is this. As we look at this, Jesus doesn't have a problem. Jesus is saying, crown me or kill me.
Yeah.
Jesus isn't asking to be liked. Jesus doesn't want to be popular. Jesus, he's influencing all of these people as they're saying these prophetic statements, and his mind isn't even with them as he's looking at all of those who still don't get it. Probably even including those that are behind him chanting because they're chanting for the right words for the wrong reasons. And so what I would say to us, I want to tell you something that maybe you haven't heard, but Jesus doesn't just want to be your friend. And I think one of the most dangerous things we can do is just make Jesus our example. Jesus wants to be our king. When we live submitted under his rule, if you've been following us on Sundays, you've been hearing our mission statement. You've been hearing that we're talking about that we believe that this church will find godly solutions for the kingdoms of this world. See, we've got to understand that something is ruling something wherever we are. Sometimes it's comfort. Sometimes it's tradition. But whatever it is, but Jesus is coming here and saying to you, listen, I bring peace. I am peace. But the only access you have is when you submit under me. Yeah. When you allow me to lead you in the menial, when I tell you to go untie a donkey, when I lead you through the dangerous. I mean, listen, if there is a target on Jesus' back, there's 12 other targets, right? If they don't have a problem killing one, then they have no problem with collateral damage with all of the other ones that that come. And so I guess what I would invite you to is, as we go into this Easter season, maybe take a look. Is there an area in your life where maybe Jesus hasn't been king? Maybe we've treated him as a friend. Maybe we've said, Jesus, that thing has always been tough. It's been tough for 30 years. It's been tough for 15 years. It's been tough for however long it's been tough for. And you understand, and he does. But can we let him rule over it? And can we be submissive under it? Because that is where peace is. When we enter into his kingdom, not just call him by name, but allow him to rule over us. Well, we want to thank you again for part 2 of our Joy Set Before Him series. We're excited to have Pastor Marco to be joining us. So we're looking forward to that.
Next week we're talking about Jesus clearing out the temple. So if you want to go ahead and read ahead.
That's right. And that's another one that is in multiple gospels. So check it out. Read it. Would love to hear your, we're reading your comments. We're tracking along with you. Again, please, if there's a story you want to share or questions you may have, feel free. You can drop it in the comment section. But of course, you can email us at info@klcc.us. And just in that subject line, you might want to put Bible study or the Joy Set Before Him. But we would love to interact with you, love to hear what God is doing, love to hear just what makes you excited as we continue to walk to the cross with Jesus as we experience this time together. But other than that, have a fantastic week. Make sure that you're tuning in and joining us throughout the week for our other services. And we cannot wait to see you. And Easter's coming, so there's room for you. There's room for you at Easter. We have an 8:30 and a 10:30 service right here if you're in the Milford area. If not, you can join us online. We love you, and we'll see you next week. Have a good night. Thank you for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed this presentation. Would you consider partnering with us to share presentations like this now and for the future? You can do so by giving a gift at klcc.us/give. Thank you for your generosity. Also, we would love to connect with you, so please follow, like, and subscribe to all of our social media platforms, as well as downloading our app on both the Apple and Google Play stores. Be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a thing. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.